All right, everybody, welcome back to the deep dive.
Yeah.
You know why you're here?
Mm-hmm.
You want to get to the bottom of this whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
The 2025 Trump Tariff War.
That's right.
What could it mean for your wallet? What could it mean for your retirement?
Big questions.
We're looking at this in-depth analysis from April 5th, 2025.
It's a lot to unpack.
And really trying to get down to the nitty-gritty of how these anticipated tariffs might shake things up in your everyday life.
Right, and not just day to day.
Yeah, and in the long run as well.
Your long-term financial security.
So think of this deep dive as your cheat sheet.
Yeah, your shortcut.
Your shortcut to really understanding this complex issue.
Exactly.
All right, so let's just jump right in.
Let's do it.
What is at the heart of this, this potential 2025 tariff war?
Well, a lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
The analysis points to some pretty interesting factors.
Okay.
Politically, we're seeing a much tougher stance on trade.
Mm-hmm.
Trade policies really become, a real hot button issue.
It's a big deal.
Big time. And then from an economic angle, there's a huge push to, prop up American industries. Make sure American manufacturing is strong, and then, zoom out to the global picture.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely this ongoing tension.
Yeah.
The U.S. feels like some of its trading partners aren't playing fair.
Yeah. So there's got to be some goals behind all this, right?
Yeah.
Like what's the objective with these potential tariffs?
Right. So the article lays out a few key objectives.
Okay.
They want to shield domestic industries from what they see as, unfair competition.
Mm-hmm.
They want to make American manufacturing more competitive.
Okay.
And ultimately address those trade practices that they consider, not on the level.
I see.
Now, the analysis suggests that the main targets here are going to be countries that the U.S. believes are, bending the rules.
Okay.
Or messing with their currency to get an advantage.
Right. And when we talk about currency manipulation, that's a pretty big deal because that can really, tilt the playing field.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, a country might, try to keep its currency artificially low so that their exports look super cheap.
Right.
And imports look more expensive, giving them a leg up in trade.
Makes sense.
So while the analysis doesn't name names, the context makes it pretty clear.
Yeah.
We could be looking at friction with, some major players in Asia and Europe.
Right. This all feels bigger than just, the pure economics of it, right?
Oh, yeah. There's definitely a political dimension here.
Yeah. What's the analysis say about that?
So it really emphasizes this buildup of tension.
Okay.
Leading into 2025, we're hearing a lot about trade imbalances, where the U.S. is buying way more from some countries than it's selling to them.
Yeah.
And there's this whole issue of intellectual property theft.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Which is a huge concern for American companies.
We're talking about, foreign companies ripping off patents and trademarks.
Oh, wow.
And the U.S. might see these tariffs as a way to, push back against that.
I see. So beyond the economics, it could be a way to, score some political points.
It's a power move.
Yeah.
Shore up support at home project strength on the world stage.
Right.
It's all part of the game.
Okay. So we've got why. Now let's get down to the brass tacks.
Right. Let's get specific.
What are the actual tariffs we're looking at?
Right.
And which industries are going to feel the heat the most?
The analysis breaks it down into three main areas.
Okay.
Manufacturing, agriculture, and technology.
Right.
We can take a look at each one, see how they might hit your pocketbook.
Yeah, let's start with manufacturing.
Okay, so
what's the outlook there?
The big one they're talking about is tariffs on imported steel and aluminum.
Okay.
Now, on the surface, that sounds like good news for, U.S. steel and aluminum makers.
Right, less competition.
Less competition from those cheaper imports. So you might see those domestic producers get a little boost.
Right.
At least in the short term.
But it can't all be sunshine and roses, right?
Right. You got to think about the ripple effects.
Yeah.
Those higher costs for imported steel and aluminum, they're going to trickle down to other manufacturers.
Like the ones who use those materials.
Exactly. So you've got companies that use a lot of steel.
Yeah.
Like car manufacturers or appliance makers.
Right.
They're going to see their costs go up.
And then those costs get passed on to...
If you pays for that.
Us.
The consumer.
Right. Higher prices for cars, appliances, all that stuff.
It's the domino effect.
Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. Let's move on to agriculture.
Okay.
What's the story there for, for farmers, for our food supply?
Agriculture is interesting.
Yeah.
The analysis says tariffs on imported food could actually be good for American farmers.
Right. Less competition again?
Less competition, exactly.
Yeah.
But there's a catch. They also point out that tariffs could drive up the cost of imported fertilizers and machinery.
Right, because farmers need that stuff.
Essential stuff. And if those costs go up,
yeah,
guess what happens?
Food prices go up.
Food prices at the grocery store go up.
Right, even if American farmers are doing better.
Exactly.
It still hurts us at the checkout.
It's all connected, you know?
Yeah, it's a complex web.
It is.
Okay, well, what about tech?
Tech.
I mean, that's like, everything these days.
It's the backbone of our lives.
Yeah. What are we looking at there?
So the anticipated tariffs here are on electronic components and consumer electronics.
Okay.
And this has the potential to really mess with the global supply chains.
Right.
Think about it. Your smartphone, your laptop, all these things.
Mm-hmm.
They rely on parts from all over the world.
Yeah.
And as those imported components get more expensive because of tariffs, companies are going to have to find a way to cover those costs.
Right.
So what do?
They raise prices.
They raise prices on us.
Of course.
It's the simplest solution, even though it hurts the consumer.
Yeah, so it seems like no matter which way you slice it, these tariffs could mean we're paying more for just about everything.
That's the big takeaway.
Right, well, let's break that down a little more.
Okay.
How exactly do these tariffs impact what we pay at the store?
Right, so at the most basic level, tariffs are taxes on imports.
Mm-hmm.
And, anytime you slap a tax on something, it's going to cost more.
Right.
Now, businesses have a couple of options here.
Okay.
They can eat those higher costs themselves, which means their profits take a hit.
Right.
Or they can pass those costs on to us.
Mm-hmm. By raising prices.
Exactly. And the analysis suggests that for most goods, like clothing, electronics, food.
The essentials.
Yeah, the things we buy every day, they're going to raise prices.
Right.
It's the easiest way to protect their bottom line.
And how does all this tie into inflation?
Inflation, the big scary word.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing. When you have tariffs reducing competition from foreign companies, it gives domestic companies a little more breathing room.
Right.
They don't have to worry as much about keeping their prices super low because they know consumers might not have as many other options.
Right.
So what happens?
Prices go up.
Prices go up across the board.
And that's inflation in a nutshell.
That's inflation. Your money doesn't go as far.
Right. Our paychecks might stay the same, but we can't buy as much with them.
Exactly. Your purchasing power takes a hit.
Okay, so what are the real world implications of this?
All right, so imagine this.
Yeah.
Families are suddenly having to tighten their belts.
Mm-hmm.
They're cutting back on things they don't absolutely need.
Right.
Maybe delaying a big purchase or dipping into savings.
Yeah.
And all of this can have a ripple effect on the economy.
Yeah.
If people are spending less, businesses might see a slowdown.
Right.
Maybe even have to lay people off.
It's that domino effect again.
Exactly. One thing leads to another.
Yeah. All right, let's switch gears a bit and talk about jobs.
Right.
We've touched on potential job gains in some sectors, but what about the overall picture?
So the analysis paints a bit of a mixed bag when it comes to jobs. On the one hand, as we talked about with manufacturing,
steel and aluminum.
Right. Steel and aluminum could see some job growth.
Okay.
If those tariffs make imported steel and aluminum more expensive, American companies might ramp up their own production. Yeah. And that could lead to new jobs.
Makes sense. But what about the industries that rely on those imports?
That's the other side of the coin.
Right.
You've got industries like tech, automotive manufacturing. They rely heavily on imported components.
Right.
And if those components get hit with tariffs, their costs are going to go up. And they might have to make some tough choices like cutting jobs.
Right, to stay afloat.
Exactly. And those job losses, they could easily outweigh the gains in steel and aluminum.
Right, so it's not a clear-cut win for jobs.
No, it's more like a shift. Some jobs might be created, but others might be lost.
Yeah. What does that mean for the average worker?
It means you got to be adaptable. You got to be willing to learn new skills.
Right.
Maybe even switch careers.
Yeah.
And the analysis talks about the need for, retraining programs to help people make those transitions.
That makes sense. All right, this is a big one.
Hit me.
How could these tariffs affect our, our retirement savings.
Ah, the money we're hoping to live on someday.
Exactly. Our IRAs, our 401ks.
Yeah. This is where things get real because tariffs can have this ripple effect on the whole economy. We've talked about how they can push up costs for businesses, and that can lead to lower profits.
Right.
And when companies aren't making as much money, their stock prices can take a hit.
Right.
And that's where your retirement savings come in.
Yeah, because a lot of those are invested in stocks.
Exactly. So if the stock market gets shaky, your retirement nest egg could feel the pain.
So basically a stock market downturn could mean we're suddenly a lot less prepared for retirement.
It's a big concern.
Yeah, and especially for people who are close to retiring.
Right. They don't have as much time to recover if the market takes a dive right before they need that money.
Right. It feels like we might need to rethink our long-term investment strategies if this all happens.
It might be time to make some adjustments.
What kinds of adjustments are we talking about?
Well, the analysis emphasizes diversification. Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Right.
Spread your investments across different asset classes. Stocks, bonds, real estate. You know, mix it up a little bit.
Okay.
And depending on your situation, how close you are to retirement, you might want to think about shifting some of your portfolio into more conservative investments. Lower risk, but also potentially lower returns.
Right, you got to weigh those trade-offs.
Exactly. But the key takeaway is have a plan and be ready to adapt.
Okay, well, all of this is a little bit scary.
I get it.
What can we actually do to protect ourselves?
So the analysis offers some really practical tips. First and foremost, diversify your investments.
Right. Spread the risk.
Don't bet everything on one horse.
Makes sense.
Second, build a strong emergency fund.
Okay.
Aim for 3 to 6 months of living expenses.
Okay.
Tucked away in a safe and accessible account.
Right. So you're not caught off guard.
Exactly. That emergency fund can be a real lifesaver if things get tough.
Agreed. Anything else?
They also suggest looking into different types of retirement accounts. You know, compare Roth IRAs versus traditional IRAs.
So?
See which one might be better for your situation. And don't forget about HSAs.
Right. Health savings accounts.
Right. They can have some real tax advantages.
Yeah.
For retirement savings. And finally, don't be afraid to talk to a financial advisor.
Yeah.
A good advisor can help you navigate all of this. Make sure your financial plan is solid.
Right. Tailor-made for your needs.
Exactly.
Okay, so be prepared, be diversified, and get some expert advice.
That's the recipe.
All right, well, looking beyond our own wallets, what kind of responses might we see from the government on all this?
Well, the analysis suggests that policymakers might start looking at existing trade agreements with a fresh perspective. Try to find a more balanced approach.
Right.
One that protects American interests, but also encourages international cooperation.
Okay.
But, you know, renegotiating trade agreements, that's a long and complicated process. It involves a lot of different countries.
It's not going to happen overnight.
Not a quick fix.
And what about businesses?
Businesses are going to have to be nimble.
Yeah.
Adapt to this new landscape.
How?
Well, some might try to absorb the higher costs, at least initially.
Yeah.
Others might look for new suppliers. Diversify their supply chains.
Right. Get their materials from different countries.
Exactly. Avoid those tariffs. And we might even see some companies bringing production back to the U.S.
Okay.
You know, investing in American manufacturing.
Right.
To reduce their reliance on imports.
So everyone's got to make some changes.
It's a new ballgame.
Yeah. Well, what about us regular folks?
We have a role to play, too.
Okay.
It's important to stay informed.
Right.
Understand what's happening.
Yeah.
And make our voices heard. Let our elected officials know what we think.
Right.
Because ultimately, they're accountable to us.
Yeah. So public pressure can actually make a difference.
It can move the needle.
Okay. Well, looking ahead, what's the crystal ball say?
The future of trade is always a bit of a mystery.
Right.
You know, global events, political winds, they can change everything. But the analysis suggests that we might see some pretty big shifts in global trade patterns and even in consumer behavior.
Right. People might start buying different things.
Exactly.
Or buying less.
Exactly. People are going to adapt to higher prices, to new realities.
Okay, so to wrap up this deep dive, let's recap what the experts are saying about this potential 2025 Trump tariff war.
Right. The big picture.
Yeah. What are the key takeaways?
Okay, so the big one is economists are pretty much in agreement.
Yeah.
Consumer prices are going to go up.
Right.
As those tariffs kick in, retailers are going to pass those higher costs on to us, and that's going to impact everyone's purchasing power.
Yeah. Are there any specific sectors that are, particularly vulnerable?
Yeah, the analysts are keeping a close eye on industries that rely heavily on imports.
Right.
Things like electronics clothing. Those companies might have a really tough time maintaining their profits.
Right.
They're going to have to either eat those costs or raise prices and risk losing customers.
And what are the economists saying about how consumers might react to all of this?
Well, they're predicting that people might start to tighten their belts, become more cautious with their spending as prices rise.
Makes sense.
And that could actually slow down the economy
It can.
and potentially fuel inflation even more.
It's a vicious cycle.
It can be.
All right, what about the business community?
So business leaders, they're worried. They say while some domestic companies might benefit in the short term from less competition, the long-term impact of a full-blown trade war could be really bad for everyone.
Okay.
They're especially concerned about other countries retaliating.
Right, with their own tariffs.
Exactly. And then you get into this tit-for-tat escalation, which could really hurt global growth.
Right.
And ultimately hurt American exports and jobs.
Yeah. So not a good outcome.
Not ideal.
And finally, what are the financial experts most concerned about?
They're really focused on retirement security.
Okay.
They're saying that if the cost of living keeps going up because of these tariffs, it's going to be harder and harder for people to save for retirement.
Right.
They're urging everyone to pay close attention to wage growth and how it compares to inflation.
Right.
Because if wages don't keep up with rising prices, it's going to be tough to make ends meet, let alone save for the future.
So it's a potential double whammy.
Yeah, higher prices and stagnant wages.
All right, well, that was a deep dive indeed.
Oh, you went deep.
Yeah, it seems like this potential 2025 Trump Tariff War could have a huge impact on everyday Americans.
It's a big deal.
Yeah, from the price of our groceries to the security of our retirement.
And everything in between.
Right. And the key takeaway here is we need to stay informed.
Be proactive.
Yeah.
Take steps to protect ourselves.
Exactly. We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
The potential impact on prices, the job market, and of course, retirement security.
The big three.
Yeah. So here's a final thought for you.
Okay.
We've talked about, the economic consequences, the political maneuvering. But what about the broader global picture?
Yeah.
The world is so interconnected these days.
Right.
How might these tariffs affect relationships between countries beyond just trade?
Yeah. Could they lead to, new alliances or maybe even...
Who knows?
Yeah, some conflicts.
It's a complex web.
It is. It's a lot to think about.
It is.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
We'll see you next time.
All right. Take care.
Bye.